Some men walk through life in silence, leaving barely a ripple. But sometimes the quietest presence in the room is the one with the deepest secrets, the kind that only come to light when fate kicks down the door. At the Crescent Bay Hotel, nobody looked twice at the tall, stoic dishwasher with calloused hands, until the night everything changed, and silence became the center of the storm. On the very edge of the city, where glass towers met the old stone bones of the waterfront, the Crescent Bay Hotel gleamed in the night like a diamond dropped in a puddle. It was the sort of place where the carpets swallowed your footsteps and every light fixture cost more than your car. Guests arrived in quiet Teslas or glossy black town cars, ushered past doormen in crisp uniforms who knew every name, every allergy, every eccentric request. But not every name. Down in the belly of the building, beneath the marble and crystal, lived a different world. The humming, clattering, overheated underbelly where nothing was ever quiet, and no one ever asked your last name unless you'd done something wrong. That's where you'd find Michael Johnson. To most, he was just another pair of hands at the sinks, a man in the shadow of the kitchen, always early, always silent, hands moving with a kind of unhurried precision. He was known as Big Mike, or sometimes the Clock, because he was never late, never complained, never gave anyone a reason to remember him. No one cared about the dishwasher's story. That was by design. If you asked, he'd say little. A shrug, a nod, maybe a just passing through. It wasn't that he was unfriendly. He was simply blank. A mountain at the edge of the room, holding up the sky and asking nothing in return. But there was one person who couldn't leave a mystery alone. Jason Ruiz, the newest member of the waitstaff. Jason was 19, rail-thin, running on college nerves and Red Bull, eyes too bright for midnight shifts. He'd only been at Crescent Bay for 3 weeks, and he still believed that if you just paid attention, everyone had a story. It bothered him. The way Big Mike never laughed at the chef's jokes, never cursed when the steam scalded his arms, never rolled his eyes at the manager's barking. "Hey, Mike," Jason tried one night, easing beside the giant man as he loaded racks of wine glasses. "You're really fast at this. You used to work at another hotel?" Michael's lips pressed into a line. "No, not a hotel." Jason grinned. "What then?" A pause. Michael glanced sideways. There was something in his eyes, a flicker, maybe a warning. But it passed. "I used to be a surgeon." Jason's eyebrows nearly hit his hairline. "A what?" "A surgeon," Michael repeated, as if stating the weather. From the prep counter, one of the line cooks snorted. "Yeah, and I used to be Beyoncé. Give me a break, man." The chef, a red-faced man with a talent for sauces and insults, chimed in without looking up. "Mike, the only thing you're operating on is those greasy pans. Don't let the kid fill your head with stories, Ruiz." The kitchen erupted in laughter. A wall of sound, a barricade against the impossible. Even the pastry chef, elbows deep in cream, let out a skeptical, "Huh." Only Jason kept looking at Michael, his curiosity bruised but not broken. But Michael didn't rise to the bait. He just kept scrubbing, his big hands gentle on the glassware, like he was polishing something that mattered. Later, as the noise faded and the kitchen settled into its nightly routine, Jason caught the older man staring into the dishwater, eyes far away. There was a line of pain carved deep between his brows, and a stillness in his body that didn't look like resignation. It looked like waiting. At the Crescent Bay, invisibility was a superpower and a sentence. Black uniforms, black shoes, eyes cast down. Do your job and keep your stories to yourself. Michael did all that, and more. If the others laughed, so what? Let them. He'd heard it all before, from surgeons' lounges to subway cars to this tiled, windowless crypt. He'd learned the hard way that sometimes silence was safer. Jason, though, couldn't let it go. The next night, as they swept the last plates off the banquet table, he tried again. For real, Mike, what happened? Why aren't you doing, surgery? Michael just smiled, the barest lift at the edge of his mouth. Life's not always a straight road, kid. There was no point pushing further. Jason knew enough about detours to understand a warning, but still, as the hotel buzzed above them, banquets, meetings, rich laughter muffled by 1,000 layers of luxury, he wondered. Because sometimes, in the oddest moments, he'd see Michael do something strange. The way he gripped a carving knife, steady as a metronome, or the way his eyes scanned a burn on a cook's wrist, hands moving before his mind caught up. It was like watching a retired athlete stretch his legs, the ghost of another life shimmering just under the skin. It was the kind of night that started perfect. The air sharp with salt from the bay and money from the boardrooms. The ballroom was booked for a private dinner. 12 tables of power, old money and new tech, senators and movie producers, and the mayor's cousin, all stuffed into tailored tuxedos. The staff moved like clockwork, and in the kitchen, the only sound was the hiss of oil and the nervous chatter of waiters rehearsing their French. Somewhere between the salad course and the filet, the night began to unravel. At first, it was a sound, barely more than a cough. A middle-aged man, balding, expensive tie, face like a bulldog, pushed his chair back from the table and made a strange sound, halfway between a gasp and a croak. No one noticed at first. These were men who'd seen every allergy, every awkward toast. But then the color drained from his face. His hands scrabbled at his throat, wild and panicked. "Someone help!" his wife screamed, wineglass shattering on the floor. Chairs toppled, napkins fluttered. The manager yelled, "Call 911!" into his earpiece, but no one moved. No one, except Michael. He moved before he thought. Years of habit, muscle memory buried under months of silence. In 3 strides, he was beside the man, ignoring the crowd, ignoring the stares. "Lay him back," he said, voice calm, as if giving orders to a surgical team. "Now." A young waiter froze, but Jason pushed past him, helping lower the man to the floor. The air was thick with panic, voices blurring into static. Michael knelt beside the man, eyes scanning, face, throat, skin. "He's swelling," he muttered. "Anaphylaxis. I need a pen and a knife. Now." The kitchen had fallen silent, all eyes wide. But Jason, adrenaline spiking, bolted for the prep counter, snatched a steak knife and a ballpoint pen, and shoved them into Michael's hand. Michael worked with the speed and certainty of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. He unscrewed the pen, removing the ink tube until only the hollow shell remained. Then, with precise hands, he made a small incision just below the Adam's apple. The room held its breath. The only sound was the wet gasp as Michael slid the pen into the opening. Air rushed in, harsh and desperate. The man's chest heaved, color slowly returning to his cheeks. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Every head turned, every phone forgotten. The manager hovered at the edge of the circle, lips moving in silent prayer. The chef stared. The old jokes turned to ash in his mouth. Michael held the man's head steady, eyes far away, hands steady as stone. He stayed that way until the paramedics arrived. too late to be heroes. They paused, jaws slack, at the sight of the makeshift airway. One of them knelt, eyes wide. Who did this? Michael rose, wiping his hands on his apron. I used to be a trauma surgeon, he said quietly. Lost my license after a bad day. Now I wash dishes. The silence was a living thing. No one laughed. Not this time. Afterward, as the sirens faded and the kitchen returned to its old rhythm, everyone looked at Michael differently. Some with awe, some with guilt, most with shame. The jokes dried up, the laughter vanished, and in its place was a new kind of silence, one thick with respect and something like fear. Jason found Michael in the dish pit an hour later, his hands still trembling. Why'd you do it, Mike? Why come back here of all places? Michael's eyes were tired, but his voice was clear. Sometimes you end up where you're needed, not where you want to be. He turned back to the sink, the shadow of his former life lingering like a scar. But Jason saw something else there too, a flicker of hope, the hint of a new story about to begin. And in the glittering halls above, where laughter came easy and money bought everything but truth, the legend of the silent dishwasher had only just begun. You never really see a person until the mask slips. In the kitchen, Michael had always been a shadow, an afterthought. But in the hours after the emergency, his name passed through every hallway and phone line of the Crescent Bay, not as gossip, but as something sharper, heavier. The silence that had been his shelter became a spotlight he could neither escape nor explain. The morning after the incident, the hotel pulsed with a new, jittery energy. The staff who'd watched Michael save a life kept sneaking glances at him, as if seeing a ghost. Some gave him wide berth. Others stared openly, mouths half open, wanting to say something. Thanks, apology, or maybe just how. The kitchen was a flurry of whispers and side eyes. The chef, who had once rolled his eyes at the very mention of Michael's past, now barely looked at him. When he did, it was a quick, grudging nod, a silent acknowledgement of a power shift neither of them understood. Jason lingered close, moving with an awkward, almost protective energy, like a kid who'd seen a magician's trick and was desperate for the secret. The banquet manager was the first to break the spell. She cornered Michael at the dish pit, her face a careful mask of concern and calculation. Mr. Johnson, Michael, I just want to say, what you did last night was, well, remarkable. The whole hotel owes you. Michael didn't look up. He rinsed a wine glass, set it aside. I did what anyone would do. That's not true, she replied softly. No one else knew what to do. We could have had a tragedy. The guest's wife left a note. She wants to thank you herself, and, well, there's a meeting with HR. They want to talk about protocol. There it was, the corporate underbelly. Michael's hands paused, water running over his knuckles. Protocol? She winced. You know how it is. Insurance, liability, public image. The guest was a senator's brother-in-law, apparently. Words getting around. There's video, too. Someone recorded the whole thing on their phone. Michael said nothing. He dried his hands on his apron, feeling the weight of all those new eyes pressing in. In the staff break room, the tone was different. Last night's cynics were now quiet, uneasy, as if remembering every unkind word. Jason perched on the edge of a battered chair, still processing everything. He caught Michael alone, near the service elevator, voice hushed. Did you really... I mean, you've done that before? That surgery thing? Michael looked at him, really looked, the way you do when deciding whether to trust someone. More times than I care to count. Trauma is all about seconds. There's no time to doubt, No time to think about what ifs. Jason shook his head. Why are you here then? You could be anywhere. A muscle in Michael's jaw flexed. Because after a while, nowhere feels safe. I lost someone on the table. Lost everything after that. My license, my marriage, my place in the world. You don't get to just start over. Sometimes you take what you can get. Sometimes that means washing dishes. Jason fell quiet. In that silence, Michael felt something loosen, a knot he'd carried for years, maybe. He realized it wasn't shame holding him back anymore. It was fear. Fear that if he stepped out of the shadows, he'd have to face himself again. At noon, Michael was called to HR. The office was cold, windowless, decorated with bland prints of beaches no one would ever visit. The head of Human Resources, Ms. Talbot, wore an expression that hovered between concern and corporate caution. "We're grateful for your actions," she began, steepling her fingers. "But there are complications. Media interest. The guest's family is grateful, but our legal team is worried about the attention. They'd like you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. No interviews, no comment to the press." She slid a crisp document across the table. Michael stared at it, the words blurring together. The offer was simple. Silence in exchange for a bonus, a week's paid leave, and the quiet promise that his job would be safe, so long as he kept his head down. Michael shook his head. "I'm not interested in money. I just want to sleep at night. That's all I ever wanted after what happened." Miss Talbot pursed her lips. "We want to help, Michael. We really do. But please just think about the hotel's reputation. We're not equipped for this kind of spotlight." Michael met her gaze. For the first time since coming to Crescent Bay, he let himself feel a spark of anger. People's lives don't always fit into a PR plan. He rose before she could answer, leaving the contract unsigned. That night, as the hotel lights dimmed and the city slipped into a foggy hush, Michael found himself by the loading dock, breathing the salt air. It was his ritual, a way to mark the end of a day he'd survived, even if he wasn't sure why. He almost didn't see the man waiting in the shadows, tall, dressed now in civilian clothes, but unmistakable from the night before. The senator's brother-in-law, his throat still wrapped in bandages, security detail lurking just behind. The man stepped forward, extending a hand. "You saved my life. That's not something I can forget. My name's James. I own a private clinic down in Texas. We lose good people every year. Burnout, bureaucracy, bad luck. We know what it's like to start over. You don't have a license? That's not the end of the road. We have retraining, counseling. You're not needed in the shadows. You're needed with people." Michael stood frozen, every old instinct screaming to run. But then James smiled, and Michael saw something he hadn't seen in years. A door, opening just a crack. "Think about it," James said, pressing a business card into Michael's hand. "There's a place for you, if you want it." Michael looked at the card, then at the city lights flickering through the mist. He didn't know what he would choose, but for the first time in years, he let himself imagine a different ending. He let himself imagine hope. In a place built on discretion and secrets, even a miracle can make people nervous. By dawn, Michael's story wasn't just kitchen gossip. It was the kind of rumor that makes managers sweat, inspires unlikely allies, and threatens to drag the truth into the sunlight. But sometimes, sunlight is the only cure for a life spent hiding in the dark. The next morning, Crescent Bay was a different hotel. In the staff locker room, Everyone pretended not to stare at Michael as he clocked in. Conversations stopped and started again as he passed, awkwardly polite or embarrassingly effusive. Someone had already taped a news clipping to the bulletin board. Dishwasher saves senator's brother-in-law with emergency surgery, staff stunned. And someone else had scribbled hero over Michael's picture. The word didn't fit. He peeled it off without a word. By noon, the hotel felt like a beehive rattled by a stone. The guests were buzzing, overheard in the elevators, in the gym, at breakfast. Did you hear? The dishwasher is a surgeon. He saved a man's life, right in front of everyone. Some of the regulars nodded, suddenly acting as if they'd known all along that Michael was more than he seemed. Others watched him warily, as if expecting him to either break down or break out. But not everyone was happy. The hotel's upper management, those who only stepped into the kitchen for staged photos, were now deeply worried. Word was getting out, faster than any of them could control. The video of Michael's rescue was spreading on social media, gathering thousands of views and dozens of hashtags. Hero in the kitchen, surgeon dishwasher, Crescent Bay miracle. A few guests had posted glowing reviews, naming Michael directly. The hotel's PR director started fielding calls from local TV and national morning shows before she'd even finished her first coffee. There was a brief, awkward meeting in the manager's office. Michael was summoned, flanked by HR and a stern-faced operations director. "We're grateful, truly," the director began, his voice rehearsed. "But this kind of attention isn't what the Crescent Bay stands for. We're about privacy, not viral moments." Michael sat quietly, hands folded, eyes steady. "I told you before, I'm not giving interviews. I don't want the attention either." The HR manager tried to smooth things over. "It's just, some of our guests value discretion above all else. This could get out of hand. Maybe take a few days off, on us, of course. Or if you'd like, we can discuss a new role, more behind the scenes." Jason, watching from the hallway, couldn't keep silent. "You want to hide him? He saved a life. Maybe you should be grateful, not embarrassed." Michael shook his head, quietly grateful for Jason's loyalty but not wanting a scene. "It's okay, kid. I just want to keep working. That's all." He left the office without signing anything, refusing the hush money, the veiled threats, and the unspoken offer to disappear. As the hours dragged on, the air felt heavier. Michael tried to focus on the dishes, the rhythm of his hands. But every so often, someone would drift by, offering a handshake, a quick thank you, or, most awkwardly, an apology for not believing him. The chef, looking sheepish, offered him a coffee and a genuine "sorry, man." Even the head waiter, who never spoke to kitchen staff except to complain, gave a stiff nod. That night, Michael's phone buzzed with messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Old colleagues, news outlets, and even a few patients' families from his past life. The sense of being watched was back, but now it felt different. A mixture of awe, confusion, and something almost like hope. The one conversation Michael dreaded most came in the quiet of the early evening, just as he finished a double shift. HR wanted another word, this time with the hotel's attorney present. He could feel the ground shifting beneath him. "We have to protect the hotel, Michael," the lawyer said gently, pushing another NDA across the desk. "If this escalates, we could lose business. Please, we're asking you to cooperate. You can have a bonus, a glowing reference, anything. Just sign." Michael looked at the paper, then at the woman sitting across from him. "I told you, I don't want money. I just want to sleep at night. After the tragedy, that's the only thing I've wanted." She stared at him, puzzled. What tragedy? Michael stood, voice quiet but steady. The one that made me who I am. He walked out, closing the door behind him with a finality that said he was done being handled. The sun had set by the time he stepped out onto the alley behind the hotel, the city lights flickering through a thin mist. That's when he saw a figure waiting in the shadows, a familiar shape, this time moving with the slow caution of someone recovering from more than just a physical wound. The businessman, now bandaged, dressed in casual clothes, approached, bodyguards hanging back. He reached out his hand. You saved my life, Mr. Johnson. I can't pay that debt, but I can offer you something else. I run a private clinic in Texas. We lose good people all the time. If you need a new start, training, support, a second chance, you're welcome there. You're needed, Michael. Not in a kitchen. Out in the world, where you belong. For a moment, Michael just listened. He thought of all the years lost, the fear that had kept him hidden, the aching longing to matter again. He looked at the card in his hand, felt its weight. For the first time in years, he smiled. A small, uncertain smile, but real. Maybe the world wasn't done with him yet. He slipped the card into his pocket, stepping into the light and away from the shadows for good.